have a couple of different legs. I'm a neuroscientist, a clinical psychologist, and these days I do an awful lot of consulting. So I do have a private practice where I do still see some patients, but mostly I'm kind of on the map as being a sex researcher. I've done an enormous amount of research, right down to brain scans, looking at what makes people into whatever it is they're into, what causes people with atypical sexualities, especially what makes them atypical, what makes anybody into whatever it is they're into.
I think you and I were emailing back and forth, and you had said that you do work a lot with people who are interested in BDSM and
Yep.
kink. How common would you say that is?
That's a good question. It's not like we can take a survey, and even today, it's not like everybody's going to admit it to themselves, never mind to a study, always check off the box. So it's tough to get, a good estimate. And BDSM doesn't work quite the same way as gay does. I mean, for gay, occasional exceptions, but pretty much it's one or the other. As I say, a couple of exceptions, but pretty much it's one or the other. With kink, it's more of a continuum. It's how much, how kinky, how severe. For some people, it has to be a kinky, it has to be, a big production, or they're just not interested. For some, it's just, a little slap here and there. For women, it's even more of a blur. A lot of women, are into being dominated, taken over. It's kind of like it's an ancient instinct, a way of testing that how capable and how dominant, how strong the potential father of their, again, evolution, so far as evolution is concerned, the potential father of her children. There's also a chemical thing that happens with women. The relevant chemical is called oxytocin. It's one of the main hormones. Most women, especially mothers, are familiar with it because it's the hormone that also produces milk letdown, for nursing mothers. And so women who are having trouble nursing, that's one of the medications. It also triggers labor. When a woman is pregnant, it's oxytocin is the hormone released by the brain that triggers labor and just, revolutionizes her entire mindset. That's when they get the feeling of going from pregnant woman to mother, and their world just changes. In men, oxytocin triggers ejaculation. But in women, part of it being related to labor, it's an anesthetic. That's how women can stand the pain of labor. It's a natural inhibitor of pain. And it's released during sexual arousal, especially in women. So it's so all of these things that seem unconnected, once you see the common ingredient, oh, this is why this is connected to this is connected to this, women can withstand more pain during sex than men can. So it allows more women to be more flexible in the range of kind of slappy, kind of more, again, I hate to use the word violent because it's kind of mock violence. There's more tolerance on average, or more flexibility in women than there is in men, where men are just kind of into it or not into it. So as I say, it's really hard to get a good measure because it depends on how much, how often, what counts, what if it's just once in a while. Hardcore BDSM folk, 1 or 2%. But the mildly kinky, kind of interested in it, that, a couple percent more. And then the people where it's a tough decision, does it count? A lot of people are just into variety. Men now especially are much more into different just for the sake of different, different partners just for the sake of different partners. Again, evolution. The better she can land the guy to help protect, the tribe, their mutual children, and so on. That's, women on average, not everybody, of course, are kind of pushed towards that direction. For a man, the more children, the more sperm that's spread around, the more genes he is going around, and it's of no cost to him. So variety, right, the men who are around are the ones for whom this characteristic worked out. So for men, that seems to be why there's, a greater need in general on average for more variety for men than among women. And again, I'm trying very hard to add the on averages and to acknowledge all of the exceptions. This isn't a hard and fast rule. These are just tendencies, and group average differences.
Yeah,
The clues they lead us to are fascinating.
fascinating to hear all of this. One thing that we found with LiveJasmin, and the Kinsey Institute has been doing a lot of research on the platform, is that many of the members that are coming, they think, I think that they're coming for the sexuality, but they are staying for the relationship and for the connection. And the Kinsey Institute reported that the longest calls and the models that are making the most money, many of them are talking about day-to-day life with the member. Those are the longest calls. And many of those models aren't even getting undressed. It's like a virtual relationship. We have obviously more female models than male models. And it just kind of clicked for me that, naturally in general, women, like you said, tend to be a little bit more naturally in tune with the social relationships and caring about them and nurturing them. So I can see how, yeah, there would be more models, and how, a man in general who may be looking for that type of connection from a woman is going to be able to find it, even if this is not someone in his day-to-day life. She's still giving those same qualities.
Yeah, it produces the same instincts. Our ancient evolved, caveman kind of brain doesn't know it's, a screen. It still scratches our ancient, our ancient instincts. And you're exactly correct. It seems to be a large influence on career choice. Mental health professionals, psychologists, social workers, right, are very, very dominantly female kinds of careers that are about, right, forming relationships and helping people, manage their emotional lives. Something else about the men developing attachments. For kinky men especially, sex doesn't look always to them like it does to the rest of us. They will sometimes perceive a sexual arousal to something that the rest of us, right, we don't even notice it. But if it's significant to them for whatever kinky reason, or again, it scratches some itch that's unique to them or relatively unique to them, the aspect of the conversation, or that they can control the conversation, that it's on their time, kind of, right, it feeds some relationship related instinct, even though it's not, this overt, masturbatory fantasy that we, immediately recognize as sexually motivated.
I want to talk about that because I have heard stories of, I'm making this up. Someone had given me a specific example, but I obviously don't want to put anyone's specifics out there. But let's say there's someone who's turned on by sneezing or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And so if he sees someone sneezing or talks to someone about sneezing or something, he is like secretly turned on. Is that a similar thing in the brain where it's like something that's so mundane is very sexual for someone? Or
it's a great question, and really it's been the driving question in my career. As I say, pedophilia was the looking for a good metaphor that wouldn't offend anybody, but it was the highest priority of the particular topics. But it's exactly the same question for all sexual interests. What makes anybody into whatever it is they're into? A good example is shoes. There were no shoes when we evolved. So where would a fetish like that, how could that be in the brain if, right, we evolved male and female and, adaptation by adaptation. All right, the brain can figure out basically what's youth, what's older, and figure out the age range of potential co-parents, and too old, too young, we're less interested in on average, but it's the potential reproductive partners is our peak favorite age range. But shoes didn't evolve like that. How can there be the kind of fetish for shoes that, right? So we don't have all the clues yet. There have to be like imprinting or like learning a language might be a really, really good analogy where we didn't evolve to speak any language, but we seem to have evolved to adapt to process symbols. And so the particular language we're exposed to before puberty, we'll speak it with no accent. Learn it after puberty, after those parts of the brain have kind of firmed up, you're going to have an accent. You can't, I mean, it takes an extreme amount of learning and practice to do without it, as opposed to if the kid is just generally exposed to it, they're going to speak it without an accent. So there may be that kind of, imprinting kinds of processes going on at the same time. And people with a fetish for shoes, to continue with that example, often have something about feet. They're often foot fetishists too. So it's easy to imagine that, the built-in part was a fetish for feet, but because the shoes are always so close to feet, that imprinting process or the learn the details of it part of the process gave them the shoes, or added the shoes to the mix of what they're into. So we don't have all the clues yet, and so some of these secondary or things that can't have existed in our evolutionary environment, those suggest that there's something more complicated than just a simple cross wiring, like some of our technical word is paraphilias for the whole family of unusual sex interests. Oh, and so a person who does have the hots for shoes or feet, what if that guy, it's almost always men, becomes a shoe salesperson? Right. From his point of view, that's like a regular straight guy being a bra salesperson, but getting away with it because, right, his fascination and opportunity to interact with and talk about and play with and touch with it's an interesting question. Is this consenting? It's a complicated question. I don't have an easy answer to that one. People are consenting to the behavior, but they're only consenting to it with the assumption that it's a neutral.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. It's a complicated question.
I actually do want to ask you about this foot fetish thing, because
Yep.
this is probably one of the biggest fetishes. As just speaking as a woman in my own experience, I almost can't talk about it without laughing, because I can't tell you how many just on Instagram random DMs I can get myself about, I'll pay you $10,000 for just a picture of your feet. And I know that there are girls on Instagram that are saying, yeah, I make $300,000 a year just from selling my feet pics, or $1 million a year just from selling my feet pics. And I do know that I always see, if I do an Instagram live or something, it's like, can you show us your feet? What is the foot fetish? Jean, where does this come from? Give us the history. Come on. There are millions of women around the world that are dying to know.
I wish we had a good answer, but as I say, because it's relatively innocuous, it's not really leading to the kinds of criminal behavior where we need to do something. Right? We're curious, and I think it's an important clue scientifically. It's a piece of the puzzle. We need to work it out, but we don't have a good answer. We don't know. It's one of a family of, again, the whole group is called paraphilias. The group that's just over-focused or narrowly focused on just one piece of anatomy, those are called the partialisms. And feet seems to be the most common. There do seem to be breast fetishists also, but not in the regular everyday straight guy kind of breast fetishy. It's like the rest of the woman doesn't exist. It's not just a high focus or he's just into tits. It's they seem different. As I say, it's like they're only making love to the tits. They're only having sex with the tits, and they don't care anything about what the rest of the person looks like. Uh, or it's mixed with a particular size or shape of breasts. You know, that they want particularly voluptuous, or they want a woman who's really, really corpulent or overweight. And it's those kinds of breasts that they're attracted to. Again, now we start wondering, oh, I can imagine an evolutionary purpose of that, because size of breasts is, has she had children before? Is she pregnant or nursing now? You know, I can imagine an evolutionary pressure selecting for, on one hand, avoid, you know, too flat chested because they're not reproductive age yet. You can't get them pregnant. And then the, you know, if she has larger or pendulous breasts, you know, she's already a successful mother. She'll be a good, you know, co-parent, or it's possible to get her pregnant. And then with some cross wiring or miswiring, they over focus on one or the other. It's imaginable, but we, the field, are really still just guessing. So in the meanwhile, you know, it's perfectly harmless. Get whatever pictures, you know, make you comfortable, have a good time.
Yes, absolutely. I assume, I mean, I've heard that, you know, men who are very into women who have long, like thick hair, it shows it's a good indication of fertility, and that's subconsciously what it is for them.
Health. That
Health,
one's mostly about health.
health.
Uh,
Okay.
well, there doesn't seem to be much of a direct relationship between hair and fertility, but it does represent, you know, lack of parasites. You know, again, you know, not so old that they're starting to lose their hair and so on. It's a sign of a healthy immune system. Same with clear skin. It's just a sign of a healthy, robust individual. So these general signs of health and well-being we're pretty naturally attracted to.
That makes sense. I have to just guess until science shows otherwise that that's the same with feet. There's something that the feet indicate that I don't know. Certain men are drawn to. I just
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Is it just, you know, the brain is looking for the entire body, head to toe, and some people just fixate on a piece of it? Again, I'm trying to think, you know, how could connective tissue maybe fit in with this? You know, if there isn't enough connective tissue, they're not integrating all of the parts of the body as they're examining people and their environment. So they're just imprinting on a particular part because they're not integrating it into a whole shape of a whole person.
right.
Worth the test, but gosh, I hope I live long enough for another, you know, clever young student in the next generation to figure this out.
I hope I find out as well. What are your thoughts on camming?
Uh, I'm sorry it took so long, really, for it to happen. Uh, One of the parts I like about the idea of camming is that it is so perfectly harmless. I mean, people aren't even there's no physical danger associated with it. But at the same time, people really get to indulge in fantasies. Something, and society in the past, I'll say since social media, really, past 15 years ish, uh, the idea of sexual fantasy, we were doing really well, you know, over the baby boomers, where, you know, diversity was good and atypical sexuality is perfectly fine, pushing the limits was perfectly fine. We seem to have lost a bit of that traction. But camming, again, gives an opportunity in an explicit, on purpose way to indulge those fantasies in, again, a harmless way that, you know, helps him internalize and imagine whatever it is that he does, and for her to be able to satisfy him, in this case, in a commercial way. So I think it's a really great addition for people who either their fantasies are something that they can't act. Well, I guess these are maybe the same thing, or something that they can't indulge in their natural in their actual life, because either that's the nature of their monogamous agreement or relationship that they're in, or the thing that they're imagining, as I say, just isn't realistic to to act out in real life. And the other one is that it allows for the diversity. Again, it adds, in a perfectly healthy, harmless way, it enables more variety, which we're kind of built in for, but while still, obeying, whatever a couple's agreement is for their decisions for monogamy, if that's what they decide. So I'm delighted to see that it happens, and it's a shame that it often gets associated with the stigma that it does, because that's just the same old problem with stigma doesn't prevent people's sexual behaviors. It just drives it underground. And that doesn't help anybody.
I feel like this quote needs to be plastered everywhere.
Take it.
That is a good one.
Use it. It's true. It doesn't get rid of it. It just kind of pushes it to, so the person being judgmental feels more comfortable because they pushed it out of view. But that's where the harm happens, because it's out of view.
Right. It's true. Yeah, that is part of why we even started this project of interviewing models, members, experts in the field, because we want all points of view there to hopefully try and start removing the stigma around our sexuality, because it seems like in general, anything associated with pleasure we're a little bit uneasy with it. Some things more than others, but certainly in regards to our sexuality, we're still quite uncomfortable with these things. Why do you think that is?
That's a great question. And I've been struggling with that question, as I say, since social media started, and it seems to have reversed a lot of the, tolerance for, genuine sexual diversity that we were, really making good progress on before slipped. I'm not convinced immediately that this time it's for the same reasons as it used to be. It used to be, I'll call it traditional religious social conservatism, just kind of born out of whatever Bible, blah, 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 take your pick. That's what it was before. And as, especially Western society became more ecumenical, that started to fade. But this isn't religious this time. My suspicion for what this second wave of that kind of judgmentalism is much more virtue signaling. With the presence of social media, people are, I'm going to show everybody else how holy I am by publicly damning everybody who's different. So it's not as motivated by God said this is the right thing to do, which is what it used to be. Now it's everybody's worried about, how is this going to make me look? How is this going to look on media? Now what a lot of people, and especially youth, which disappoints me, there's a lot of being on the right side of history. Oh, yeah, like we've been so good about predicting history from the past. Whenever somebody says be on the right side of history, all I can think of, this is pure pressure from people who haven't been born yet. People are worried about, or the other expression, nice look. No, it was when we stopped worrying about what the neighbors are going to think. That's what gave us the progress that doesn't matter what the neighbors think. As long as nobody's getting hurt, do what you want. But social media, where everybody is always in contact, showing every meal they eat, every vacation they're on, every outfit that they're wearing, everybody's always trying to project, look how good my life is, look at all the smiles, look how happy I am. And I'm going, this was the worst part of what was going on, is everybody trying to look like they're doing the right thing. But instead of looking like you're doing the right thing for God, they're doing it for everybody else on the internet. So I think that even though the behavior is pretty much the same, I think it's motivated by an even less healthy thing that it was before. And so that's, as I say, I think that's my disappointment with where society has gone, is that there's been this unfortunate and unhealthy side effect of social media.
Yeah, I really agree with you. It does seem like, people kind of pick a side of things or say things or go mob mentality with a certain group or whatever the case is and be like, see, I'm still part of the group, right? I'm still okay. It's about a social connection thing when maybe you've heard them express that they feel otherwise, or it's not necessarily authentic to who they are on inside and what they truly think and feel, but it's more this trying to remain connected to the group. And that's part of why cancel culture is so big now, because we've realized that people are so hurt by feeling ostracized and being cut off from this group, the mob,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
and so they cancel people to punish them because they know it's so painful, and no one wants to get canceled or cut off.
Sometimes I wish that you don't get an iPhone until you get a driver's license. You have to be, past adolescence, and you need your head screwed on straight. You need to have figured out your identity before you get exposed to all of this, pseudo social contact. I think social media has, I think, displaced genuine social contact, and it's ubiquitous. Yeah, and again, like learning a language, and adolescents, girls especially, because girls are, again, more sensitive. They function in a social world. There's more to learn, and it requires interaction with friends, subtle, eye movements, being, in each other's physical company. That's been displaced by just these perfected photoshopped images of each other. And so and again, girls are more sensitive to this, comparing themselves, forgive me if I'm mansplaining, comparing themselves to these perfected images of what a woman is supposed to be like. Right. And it's not just magazines anymore. It is all of their friends and their entire lives. And it's not healthy. Even in sex, today's young generation is not having nearly as much sex as prior generations. They're not going out. There is no, accidental meetings. There are no, not as many parties. COVID didn't help any either. So those kinds of spontaneous group and social activities aren't happening as much as before. As I say, I really, in my fantasy world, people wouldn't be able to get onto social media until, adult brain has finished developing. I really don't think it's doing any good to kids these days. The mental health concerns skyrocketing. Personality disorders, rates of autism spectrum disorders, depression, anxiety, all of them just exploding. And I think it's because they're not, feeling the genuine social connections. They don't have an opportunity to practice and screw up and do all the stupid things, socially that kids do until they figure it out. So now kids aren't able to do those experiments because it's on social media now. So they can't, take those social risks like they used to be because they're always on stage, or at least they feel like they're always on stage.
I always tell my group of girlfriends that I went to high school and college with, thank God we missed that time. We missed it by a hair, but we missed that time of where everything you do lives somewhere. Someone has a picture of it, someone has a video of it, someone has a whatever. There is something so sacred, I think, about going through your adolescence in a way where it's like, I don't want to say hidden, but it's just yours. And there's none of that anymore.
That's where we make our mistakes and figure it out. And so they're not getting the opportunity to do that. They don't get, like the restart button when they leave for college and university, new set of friends, the good ones stay your whole life when you're lucky, but they don't get that reset opportunity, when there's no clean break between those portions of their lives. And so it's the combination of, not being able to practice, always being looked at, and that the people who are talking the most on social media that they're exposing themselves to are the ones who are being so judgmental and yelling at each other, and it's just not healthy. And the stats show it. This generation is not, as a group, again, I'm generalizing, but they're not healthy. There is something very, very wrong.
So your obvious take is that digital connection will never replace that in-person connection.
Not in value. But as even in the young generation, it seems to be taking it seems to be in youth. It's not going to take away any of the drives, but when it's in a situation like a camming situation, when that's the point, that's the purpose of it, when it's done for a healthy purpose, go to it. But it's the, creating, real life and real world connections, that it's not camming that's displacing it. It's it's more like the Twitter and the Instagram worlds, when it's a two-way kind of a relationship, and people think that their interactions are even, that they're both getting the same thing out of it. When two people are communicating, sharing their pictures of whatever restaurant they went out to, whatever they made for dinner, or the new shoes they bought, whatever it is, when their friendships are being mediated over social media instead of in person, right, that's when it seems to be displacing the spontaneity of regular life, just being in the company of another humans, a set of human pheromones. Something's lost there. But for people, especially people with atypical sexualities, or people who are looking for, just variety in their sexual stimuli, now they're getting something extra that wasn't available to them before. So it really depends on the circumstance. For some areas, it's adding genuine value. But when it starts becoming the Twitter kinds of stuff, where it's replacing going out for coffee or beer or whatever with friends, right now it's displacing something that you were better off with, instead of adding something that was missing.
Yeah, that's actually a really great distinction. Like you said, we also have a lot of members who have disabilities and they're not as mobile,
Excellent
able
example.
to leave their homes. And so, yeah, the still getting their intimacy and connection needs met through LiveJasmin, that's an added thing because they couldn't really leave anyway. But yeah, if you're like, oh, to your best friend who lives 2 minutes away, let's FaceTime instead of going to the mall, then it's not as much adding as much value.
Right. It's displacing instead of accentuating or adding.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know you mentioned that you work a lot with couples and relationships, and I'm curious, is there any one particular thing that you've seen as a theme or that you've noticed that is a block to connection in relationships?
Usually the questions I get from couples are something about their sex life.
Mhm.
Either they're not having sex together is one very common one. But actually, probably the most common question I get are couples who aren't sure that they still want to be monogamous,
Right.
and they're thinking about having an open relationship, and they're trying to figure out, how to do that in a way, but without upsetting anyone, or they just have no role models for it, or they know they don't know what they're doing, and they don't trust what they're reading on the internet, and so they want to ask a professional, are we doing this for the right reason? Is there a backup? Can we kind of talk it out with a referee from their point of view, to make sure that they're considering the things that they need to be considering, and not accidentally get themselves in trouble. Those are usually the kinds of questions that I get. And camming actually represents a fascinating example of that, like what we were talking about before. Does that count as cheating? There's no objective answer, yes or no. It's really, how do they feel about it? Do they feel violated? And then it's the combination of, respecting people's boundaries. But by the same token, it's also healthy now and then to push boundaries. Is somebody rejecting it for the wrong reason? For some people, it's as I said, people's values are their values. There is no objectively correct reason. For some people who feel like the relationship isn't going well and this is just going to add another pressure, and sex or sex-ish kinds of camming relationships might displace more of their couple time, that's one thing. Again, we're displacing something in the real world. But for others, kind of an artificial three-way, if I describe it that. Or if one has a higher sex drive than the other, and so it helps, scratch that itch where the other one doesn't feel like she usually is just going through the motions of it. Now it's adding something to that relationship. And with camming, it also, doesn't pose the danger of a, in-person, live sexual partner. Right, you don't have to worry about the other one actually falling in love with your partner, so it's a safer alternative that's easier to veto or put an end to if it doesn't work out, or if you change your minds later, or he usually wants to switch partners again. So I guess what I'm finding is that if it's displacing something in the real world, that's one thing, but if it's adding something that was missing, that's another.
Is there anything about human sexuality that you just wish people would get?
Oh, that fantasies are harmless. That just because somebody is having a fantasy about fill in the blank, that's not the same as having a plan to whatever. It doesn't mean it's going to lead to the actual. Now, again, this can range anywhere from, kinky kinds of stuff to just weird kinds of stuff to, all right. But, and I know that your group has very specific rules about it. What about somebody who's dressed up as a kid? Right. It's really, again, testing our comfort boundaries, and it's a legitimate question. But fantasies are still just fantasies. There's no evidence to suggest that this is going to lead to actually doing it. So is, outlawing it or banning it, we're banning a fantasy? What? And again, I very, very much appreciate, people's discomfort with it, especially when, we're talking about children, because, the group more than any that we should be protecting, and, the problems, are at the level that they are. But all right, so where do we draw the line? Do we either enforce fantasies or not? We enforce some fantasies and not others. But the science on this is pretty clear. Fantasies are fantasies. If the content of the fantasy isn't it, that where people's, I think, misapprehension comes from, and again, I understand the source of it. People only hear about the situations that are problems. Whenever there is a genuine offense, when there's a genuine victim, when somebody was actually hurt, it was somebody with, the fantasies of doing that. And those are the only cases people hear about. So most people, right, to them, they're synonyms. One leads to the other, so we need to cut it off while it's still a fantasy. But that's not actually how it works. The person, goes home, masturbates over, whatever his fantasy, is, wipes up and goes to sleep. That doesn't make the papers. So nobody, right, we only hear about the difficult ones. So the lesson that I wish people would be able to absorb, and again, I appreciate that it's a challenge, is that fantasies are harmless. That the stuff we're seeing, we only see the criminal ones, but the fantasy itself didn't cause that. It was the feeling of desperation and not having a healthy way to express it. That's what motivated it to translate into actual world. If we facilitated healthy, harmless ways of engaging in a fantasy, job done. It can stay a fantasy. So people's, right, trying to cut off the fantasy, thinking that they're cutting off the behavior, are actually making it worse. We should be facilitating it and making it easier to be, exist, and indulge in the fantasy, and then there's no need for it to translate into. So these people who think that they're making things better are actually making it worse. For men, we're into what we're into, and it's not going to change. If we, the easier we make it available for men to indulge in the fantasy part, then it will stay a fantasy.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That is fascinating. Yeah.
Yep, great stuff. As I say, I don't know why everybody isn't a sex researcher.
Yeah, that's great. I can tell you're really passionate about what you do and you love it. And yeah, we really appreciate you giving us such a great interview today.
Happy to. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.